A young woman didn't show up for her shift at the store, and right away, her coworkers knew something was wrong. When police got involved, it seemed like the case would be pretty straightforward. But days turned into weeks, and no matter what they tried, they couldn't get any closer to justice. Then, out of nowhere, they got a phone call, a shocking twist that no one saw coming, and one that finally revealed the truth. Amber Belken was born on December 6, 1981, in San Antonio, Texas. She was an only child, which meant her parents gave her all the love and attention in the world. From a young age, Amber had a huge heart for animals. She was always bringing home strays, not just cats and dogs, but turtles, frogs, pretty much anything she could find, and her parents actually let her keep them. Over time, she decided she wanted to become a veterinarian, and after graduating high school, her plan was to go to college. But first, she figured she'd save up some money, so she got a job at a video game store. Amber quickly proved herself to be reliable and hardworking, and before long, she was promoted to store manager. She held that position for about 3 years, and in 2007, when she was 25, she finally signed up for veterinary courses at the local college. On January 29th, Amber was supposed to open the store for her shift, but for some reason, she never showed up. As the manager, she was usually the first one in, but that morning, no one had heard from her. When the head office realized the store still hadn't opened, they tried calling Amber, but she didn't answer. They even tried calling the store's landline, but got nothing. So they reached out to a nearby location and asked one of the employees to swing by and check things out. An employee named Giovanni agreed to head over and see what was going on. When he got there, the store was completely dark. The doors were locked, the lights were off, and it looked like no one was inside. He walked around the building, peeked through the windows, but didn't see anything unusual and left. After that, he let management know what he saw. They kept trying to get in touch with Amber, but there was still no response. Hours went by with no sign of her, and around noon, corporate called the other store again and asked Giovanni to go back for another check. Giovanni showed up at the store again, but this time, something was different. The lights were still off and the doors were locked, but when he looked through the window, he saw someone inside. It was another coworker named Brandon. Brandon let him in, and right away, Giovanni noticed the place was a mess. Game boxes and other stuff were scattered all over the floor. The register was open, and there was cash tossed around the counter. It looked like the store had been robbed, but strangely, Brandon was acting like he didn't even notice the chaos. Giovanni headed to the manager's office to check the safe, where the cash from the night before was usually stored. But as soon as he opened the door, he froze. Right there on the floor was a body, with a plastic bag pulled tightly over the head. Giovanni called the police right away, and officers were soon on the scene. It didn't take long for investigators to confirm that the victim was Amber. After looking around the store, they came to what seemed like the obvious conclusion. She'd been killed during a robbery. The cash register was wide open, and the safe in the office had been completely cleaned out. Amber's car was still in the parking lot just outside. The doors were unlocked, and her cell phone was sitting on the seat. That raised even more questions. Why would she leave her car wide open with all her stuff inside? Another thing that didn't add up was how the killer actually left the building. Both doors had been locked when Giovanni showed up earlier that morning. With the help of other employees, detectives figured out that the suspect had taken more than just the cash. They'd also stolen around 50 video game discs, an Xbox, and a few PlayStations, totaling roughly $6,000. While police were putting the pieces together, the medical examiner determined that Amber had died from asphyxiation. It looked like the killer used a plastic bag and held it over her head until she stopped breathing. Experts believe the struggle lasted several minutes, and through it all, Amber fought with everything she had, but couldn't break free. They also discovered that her hands had been bound with duct tape at some point, but the killer had likely removed it after she died. Detectives spoke with Amber's coworkers and learned that she usually arrived at the store around 9 a.m., an hour before opening. Her routine was to collect the cash from the safe and take it to the bank before getting the store ready for the day. Based on what they knew, Amber had shown up right on schedule that morning, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. Investigators believe the killer attacked her almost immediately before she had the chance to grab the money. Soon, detectives got another valuable lead. The manager of a different store in the same chain said he'd spoken with Amber on the phone that morning. They talked just a few minutes after she arrived at work, but the call didn't last long. Amber suddenly said she had to go and hung up. The more information police uncovered, the more it started to look like this was something bigger than just a random robbery. For one thing, the level of violence used didn't make much sense. Amber had apparently opened both the register and the safe, so the killer didn't need to hurt her to get the money. And if the goal was to silence her to avoid getting caught, that didn't quite track either. In most cases like this, robbers use a gun or a knife. Strangulation, on the other hand, often suggests something personal. On top of that, detectives believe the killer may have come in through the back door, which raised another red flag. That door opened into an alley filled with identical doors to other businesses. So, unless you were familiar with the building, there was no easy way to know which door led where. Putting all of this together, police started to suspect the killer may have had a personal motive, and possibly even worked at the store. The robbery, they now believed, might have been staged to cover up what was really a targeted murder. Still, detectives didn't have a single piece of physical evidence to go on. This particular store didn't have any surveillance cameras, unlike every other location in the chain. And when crime scene techs combed through the place, they didn't find any useful fingerprints or DNA on the bag or Amber's body. But by the time police had pieced all of that together, they already had a suspect: Brandon. As you might remember, he's the one Giovanni saw inside the store during his second visit. Brandon was standing there in the dark, with the door still locked, acting like the mess in the open register didn't even exist. He also told police he hadn't gone into the manager's office and didn't see Amber's body. According to Brandon, he showed up for his shift just minutes before Giovanni got there. When he saw the lights off and the store still locked, he figured he must have gotten the schedule wrong. Maybe it was his day to open. So he let himself in and found the place a mess. But instead of being alarmed, he just assumed the crew from the night before had left it like that, and started worrying he'd be the one to catch the blame. Brandon swore he had nothing to do with Amber's death, said he never saw her body and had no idea anything was wrong. But detectives weren't ready to just take his word for it. He knew the building inside and out, knew there were no cameras, and on top of that, they'd found something else: a possible motive. Amber's family and other coworkers told police she had complained about Brandon multiple times. He was her assistant, and according to Amber, he constantly slacked off and didn't take his job seriously. Things got so bad, she eventually decided to file an official complaint with management, and even asked for him to be fired. But here's the key detail: Amber was planning to send that complaint the very morning she was killed. So yeah, Brandon had both motive and opportunity. But still, police didn't have a shred of evidence linking him to the crime. They got a warrant to search his house, his car, even his phone, and to their surprise, they found nothing. And that was odd, because the killer had taken nearly 50 game discs and 4 consoles. That stuff had to be somewhere, but there was no trace of it. Not in Brandon's car, not in his apartment. Even more surprising were his phone records. Data from his cell phone provider showed that Brandon was nowhere near the store until around 2 p.m., and Amber was killed somewhere around 9 in the morning. On top of that, he claimed to have an alibi. He said he'd spent that morning helping his fiancée and her parents, and when police followed up, they all backed up his story. Even so, police still weren't ready to cross Brandon off their list. For the next few days, they double-checked his alibi and tried to figure out if there was any way he could have possibly pulled this off. Meanwhile, Amber's funeral took place, and to everyone's shock, Brandon showed up. By that point, her whole family knew he was the main suspect, so seeing him there felt like a slap in the face. But eventually, detectives confirmed that his alibi was rock solid. there was just no way he could have been at the store that morning. So, despite the red flags and the odd behavior, they had no choice but to rule him out and start looking elsewhere. They also considered Amber's boyfriend, a guy named Fred. Just minutes before her death, she had texted him, "Love you." But like Brandon, Fred had a bulletproof alibi. So, once again, police were back to square one. Sometime later, investigators held a press conference with Amber's parents, asking the public to come forward with any information about the case. A massive reward of $100,000 was offered, most of it put up by the store where Amber had worked. Over the next few weeks, tips started coming in, but one by one, they all led to dead ends. So, the case slowly went cold, and as the months dragged on with no answers, detectives started to wonder if justice would ever be served. That went on for 7 months, until the case suddenly took an unexpected turn. Police got a call from a man who wanted to remain anonymous. He claimed he had some information about Amber's murder, but at first, he was vague and hesitant. Still, sometime later, he agreed to meet with detectives and share what he knew. According to this witness, the day before Amber was killed, a friend of his had suggested they pull off an easy robbery. He turned the offer down, but the next day, when he saw the news about Amber's murder, he immediately knew who was behind it, because his friend worked at the same chain. But that friend wasn't Brandon. It was Giovanni. The witness said he met up with Giovanni the day after the murder, and during their conversation, Giovanni flat out admitted to killing Amber. The man said he was stunned by the confession, but at the time, he was too scared to go to the police, because he was convinced Giovanni might come after him next. What made this even more significant was that the witness knew both Giovanni and Amber. They had all worked at the same store for a while. So, Giovanni would have known there were no security cameras, and he could have easily walked through the door that morning, because Amber wouldn't have thought twice about letting him in. Right after that, police brought Giovanni in for questioning, but he denied everything. He insisted he had nothing to do with Amber's murder, and no matter how hard detectives tried, they couldn't get him to crack. So, in the end, they had to let him go. With no physical evidence tying him to the crime, detectives started to wonder whether the witness's testimony alone would be enough to take this to trial. But the district attorney wasn't convinced. He told them that without something solid, there was almost no chance they could convince a jury. As a last-ditch effort, they decided to collect a DNA sample from Giovanni, hoping the pressure might shake him up. Even though they didn't have any usable biological evidence from the scene, maybe just the idea of handing over his DNA would rattle him. They got a warrant, showed up at his house, and Giovanni handed over the sample, but stuck to his story and kept claiming his innocence. Then, the next day, something else happened. Detectives found out that Giovanni had left town with his wife and kids. They'd moved to a place called Laredo, right on the border with Mexico. To the detectives, that felt like a huge red flag. But the problem was, without any hard evidence, their hands were tied. They couldn't arrest him, and now they were seriously worried he might slip across the border, where tracking him down would be a whole lot harder. Over the next few months, police kept digging for new leads, but nothing panned out. A year and a half went by, and it was starting to feel like Giovanni might never be brought to justice. But then, out of nowhere, detectives got a call that changed everything. It was June 2008, 18 months after Amber's murder, and on the other end of the line was a woman named Veronica. What immediately caught their attention was who she was: Giovanni's wife. She told detectives that at first she never believed her husband had anything to do with Amber's death, but everything changed the day police showed up to collect his DNA. As soon as the officers left, Giovanni turned to her and said they needed to pack up and get ready to move. When she asked him what was going on, he said the cops suspected him of murder. Veronica then asked, "Did you kill someone?" And he looked her in the eyes and said, "Yes." Veronica instantly knew he was talking about Amber, but she was too scared to argue or say no. According to her, Giovanni had always been aggressive and controlling. He tracked her every move and refused to take no for an answer when it came to intimacy. If she resisted, he'd tie her up with duct tape and force himself on her. He didn't even care that their kids were asleep in the same room. They all lived in a one-bedroom apartment. She was convinced that if she ever went to the police, he'd kill her. So she stayed quiet, moved with him, and tried to survive. But one day, she got the courage to ask him directly, did he kill Amber? And Giovanni confirmed it. He also said it happened during a robbery. Veronica begged him to turn himself in, but he refused. As a result, she told him she wanted a divorce and planned to take the kids with her. In response, Giovanni said they should talk about it calmly over coffee. But instead of driving to a cafe, he took her out to the middle of nowhere, locked the car doors, and pulled out a gun. She begged him not to kill her, but Giovanni wouldn't listen. He sexually assaulted her at gunpoint, and then, out of nowhere, he did something she never saw coming. He handed her the gun and told her to shoot him. But Veronica refused. She managed to convince him that if he died and she went to prison for killing him, their 2 kids would lose both parents. Eventually, he calmed down and drove her back home. The next day, Giovanni took her and the kids to her mother's house, then took off. As soon as he left, Veronica called the police. With her statement in hand, the district attorney finally gave the green light for an arrest. But there was one big problem. Giovanni's exact whereabouts were unknown, and detectives believed he was already in Mexico. They contacted the U.S. Marshals, who added him to their 15 most wanted list, and began working with Mexican authorities to track him down. The process dragged on for about a month and a half, until Mexican authorities finally tracked Giovanni down at a relative's house. He was just across the U.S. border, only a few miles away. And in a cruel twist of irony, when they arrested him, he was playing one of the very games he'd stolen from the store the day Amber was killed. Under the extradition agreement between the U.S. and Mexico, bringing Giovanni back to Texas came with one condition. Prosecutors had to take the death penalty off the table. They didn't really have a choice, so they agreed. And later, they decided to offer Giovanni a plea deal, because without the death penalty, the DA didn't see much point in dragging the trial out for years. As part of the deal, Giovanni had to plead guilty in exchange for a life sentence, with the possibility of parole after 30 years. He agreed and finally told his version of what happened that morning. According to him, he never meant to kill Amber. He just wanted to steal some money because he'd recently lost his job. At first, he said, she did everything he asked, but at some point, she tried to call for help, and that's when he killed her. But detectives didn't buy that story for a second. First off, Giovanni hadn't lost his job. He was still working at another store at the time of the murder. And second, the whole idea that he didn't plan to kill her didn't make much sense either. Amber knew who he was. Even if he'd gotten away with the robbery, she could have easily told police exactly who to look for. He also claimed that he'd felt guilty the entire time and had actually been thinking about turning himself in, but said he kept putting others' needs before his own, whatever that was supposed to mean. As part of the deal, Giovanni only had to give a partial confession, so some details about what really happened that day remain a mystery. In the end, he was sent to prison, and the earliest he'll be eligible for parole is in 2038. After the sentencing, Amber's parents made it clear they're going to fight with everything they've got to make sure he never walks free. And finally, I want to mention Brandon, the man police initially suspected of Amber's murder. For weeks, detectives treated him like a killer, and everyone around him, his family, his friends, knew he was under suspicion. Investigators even tried to pressure his fiancée into turning him in. They asked her, "How can you sleep with a murderer?" and warned her that she might be his next victim. But despite all that, police never officially told Brandon he was no longer a suspect. For a long time, he lived with the fear that he might go to prison for something he didn't do, and the people around him had no idea he'd been cleared. In the end though, Brandon managed to rebuild his life. He got married, started a family, and in 2018, he even saved a young girl's life. At that point, he was working as a truck driver, and as he passed a drainage canal, he spotted a 13-year-old girl being swept away by the current. There'd been a heavy storm, and the canal was overflowing. She couldn't get out on her own, so Brandon ran over to help. With the help of others, they brought over a ladder and the girl climbed out. She spent a few days in the hospital, but she survived, all thanks to Brandon. Share your thoughts on this story in the comments section, and don't forget to press the like button if you enjoyed my video. Thank you for watching.